Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hello, lovely threadheads. How are you doing? If you're challenging yourself for Me Made May this year, I hope you've been having fun and that you've been learning lots of useful things about your wardrobe. My personal challenge this year is to wear me-made clothing, which I do anyway, but in unique combinations each day. I've made that same pledge for a number of years because it really makes me work on finding new ways to wear my existing clothes. Sometimes it's successful and gives me new options to reach for throughout the rest of the year. Sometimes it doesn't work at all, but at least I tested something out. This year I've amped my pledge up a bit by excluding any outfit combos I've worn previously outside the challenge. So straight out of the gate this May, I can't even wear my regular combinations even once. I'm not really sharing my outfits on social media this year, although I am taking short videos that I'm putting into the 1 second everyday app, so I can make a short video at the end of the month to document my challenge. So how are your making projects going? I've decided to add a mending aspect to my Me Made May pledge also. In January this year, I attempted to get to the bottom of my mending pile. That went pretty well, but you know how these things pile up again. So I want to do my damnedest to get most, if not all, my mends done by the end of May. I also finished up a very cute pink leopard print corduroy pinafore for my daughter that I started a few weeks ago. She hasn't tried it on yet, so I haven't determined if it's a win or not yet. For that, I used the penny pinafore pattern by Waves and Wild, which I think I referred to in this episode, in fact. This week, I took myself on a bit of a sustainability mission to Hove. I went to the library to take a couple of my kids' library books back, and I got out a couple of books on vegetable growing for myself, which, as you know, is something that I do as part of my drive to live more sustainably. I also visited a million charity shops and scored a brand new unworn pair of shoes in future sizes for each of my kids, plus a pair of second-hand sunglasses to keep as a spare, because I have a terrible track record when it comes to losing or breaking sunglasses. I deposited heaps of used batteries and some dead light bulbs in Robert Dyer's for recycling, which is the only place that I know where you can recycle light bulbs. I also took some empty toiletries and old toothbrushes and dead makeup to Boots and deposited them in their recycling scheme bin. So UK listeners, did you know that Boots collects pretty much any hard to recycle piece of toiletry or makeup packaging? There's a guarantee that what you put in won't go to landfill or be incinerated, but I'm struggling to believe that it all does get recycled. I don't know what they do with it exactly, but I feel that saving it all up and taking it there now and again has got to be better than chucking it in the bin. Check on their website though for where your nearest Boots is that actually collects these items, because it's not all of them. Oh, and finally on my mission, I went to a refill shop and I got some toiletries filled up and I bought some plastic-free pasta. I'm super lucky that I have some flexibility in my week, so I can schedule the odd trip like this. And it takes a certain amount of space to collect all the different items that don't go into your regular recycling collection. I'm lucky enough to be able to do both though, so I will continue to do so until something else changes. This week, I'd like to give a huge virtual hug to Tracy and Sophie, who are the newest listeners to sign up to support the podcast via Patreon. Many thanks to you both. Every new patron makes it increasingly viable for me to continue making this podcast in the long term. So if you enjoy listening each week, please consider signing up. You can do so for any amount that works for you. Details can be found by clicking the link in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. Last week, I was able to invite patrons to an exclusive little Zoom event where I was chatting with Jennifer Weiss from the Workroom Social about Me Made Style. Patrons of Check Your Thread don't receive additional content like patrons of other podcasts do, because I want to keep all audio available to everybody no matter what your disposable income is. But I do hope to be able to offer extra fun little things to patrons more often. Plus, did you know that there's a free monthly Check Your Thread newsletter? It includes some behind-the-scenes info, links to interesting things I've found lately, and it includes the opportunity for you to weigh in on future Check Your Thread episodes, and includes the occasional sneaky peek. Sign up on the website checkyourthread.com. So, on to this week's episode. As you will no doubt have noticed, today's episode is a solo one all about how to use sewing patterns more sustainably. So part of my personal manifesto is to keep the environment in mind when I'm making every single decision, and that of course can be applied to our sewing lives. So today we're looking at how we can reduce the impact of our sewing activities and reduce the amount of waste produced as it relates to using sewing patterns specifically. This is a super practical episode full of lots of direct advice and actionable tips. Oh, and I need to own up to one mistake, however. At the start of this episode, I state that there are 4 different formats in which you can currently buy sewing patterns, but I forgot a 5th. The night after I recorded the episode, I literally woke up remembering that pattern magazines and books exist, so apologies for that omission. When you're listening, please mentally insert the 5th format of pattern magazines and books to my list. Show notes this week include all the main points I make in this episode. Okay, let's do this. A couple of months ago, I received an email from Check Your Thread listener and patron Vic Tweedy. They were asking if I'd consider the topic of purchasing and using sewing patterns and the sustainability around that. I gave it some thought, and it turns out that I have quite a bit to say on the topic. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it also, so please drop me an email, comment or message if there's anything you'd like to add. Please note that pattern alteration, adaptation and hacking are also topics that relate to using sewing patterns more sustainably, but they are topics I'll address in future episodes more directly. Okay, let's get into it. So sewing patterns currently come in 4 formats. The traditional patterns printed onto paper. Number 2, as digital PDF files that require printing out. Number 3, as projector files that get projected directly onto the fabric. Number 4, as sets of instructions or measurements that guide you to draw the pattern directly onto fabric. Now, I don't know too much about format 3, projector files, so I'm either going to do a bunch of research or find an expert to speak to and do a separate episode on that topic in the future. And format 4, a set of instructions or measurements to guide you to draw the pattern directly onto the fabric, is often used for zero waste or low waste sewing patterns. I made an Intro to Zero Waste Patterns episode previously, which is number 17, and I spoke about them with Liz Haywood for episode 31, so I'd encourage you to listen to those if you haven't already. Plus, it's a topic I'll definitely be revisiting in the future. So let's leave formats 3 and 4 for now and focus on formats 1, printed paper patterns, and 2, digital PDF files for the rest of this episode. So prior to home computers, commercial dressmaking patterns were exclusively available in paper format. Most patterns prior to the 1970s were single-sized rather than multi-sized, and prior to the 1940s, patterns weren't even printed, and instead featured punched-out dots of different sizes to indicate darts and other markings to guide you through the construction. These days, the major commercial sewing pattern manufacturers, Vogue, Butterick, McCall's, Simplicity, Burda and Quicksew, still all produce their patterns in paper form only. Many independent sewing pattern companies and designers sell their patterns in PDF form only, or at least usually start out as such, and eventually offer both formats once they have become more established and have the capital, logistics and possibly storage space to expand into paper inventory. If you've been sewing for a while and use sewing patterns, you probably have a preference for one format over another if the choice is available. There are many different reasons I've heard sewers cite for why they prefer one over another, but in this episode I'm focusing on the sustainability aspects for making that choice, and I'll also offer some tips on using both formats more sustainably. But having given it a bunch of thought, I would argue that it's more sustainable to buy a sewing pattern as a PDF rather than a physical paper pattern. My argument for this lies largely in that fewer material resources and energy are required in the purchasing and owning of a PDF file as opposed to the printed paper version. A paper pattern has already been printed and comes with an instruction booklet and envelope or other packaging, all of which will have been produced from raw materials. And the elements that your pattern consists of will have been on a journey, possibly around the globe, before it reaches your door or the sewing shop that you brought it from. Yes, to use a PDF sewing pattern, you will need to print it out, which will require materials and energy. But presumably, you'll be printing it at home or using a printing service close to home. Plus, you can read the instructions directly from your computer or tablet or phone, so no printed instruction booklet or paper packaging. And let's be honest, how many sewing patterns in either format do you own that you haven't used yet? So although everything has a carbon footprint, even an email or a digital file, an unused pattern in PDF form is going to have less associated impact than an unused paper pattern. So that's where I currently fall down on the topic, and why I almost always plumb for a pattern in digital form when I have a choice. If you have other thoughts on this issue, please let me know. I'm always open to having my mind changed. But regardless of the format we acquire our patterns in, there are a lot we can do related to their use that can affect their impact. So let's move on to that. So paper patterns. When there's a paper pattern you're interested in buying, find out where in the world it's produced. That might impact the retailer you choose to buy it from. For example, I work at Fabric Godmother, which is an online fabric and sewing shop based here in the UK. Fabric Godmother stocks paper cut patterns which are produced in New Zealand. However, sometimes Fabric Godmother receives an order for a paper cut pattern from a customer who lives in New Zealand or Australia. So those patterns which are printed in New Zealand get shipped across the globe twice, when their journey could have been much shorter. Then, when you have your paper pattern in your mitts, you have the choice to either go ahead and cut out your size, making adjustments as you go if you wish, or trace off the pieces beforehand onto more paper first. If you've heard or seen another sewer refer to themselves as team cut or team trace, this is what they're referring to. From a sustainability standpoint, the latter sounds like it uses double the paper, and therefore might not make sense. However, I see it in a similar way as making toiles or muslins. On the surface, it seems like you're using double the materials, but by giving yourself the opportunity to test out fit and alterations on the practice go, you're likely to be preserving more resources overall. Allow me to elaborate and argue the case further. If you plan to make any alterations, or suspect you might need to make any alterations in the future, tracing first rather than cutting straight away is absolutely the best choice. You can play around on the traced off pieces and always have the original version to refer to. Or if your alterations don't go to plan, you can trace the pieces off again and start over. Tracing is also necessary if you want to retain all the sizes. You may wish to make another size for yourself or someone else in the future. Plus, by tracing off your pieces and keeping the original pattern uncut, it means that when you no longer want it, it can be passed on to another person, at a sewing swap perhaps, or by donating it to a charity shop or thrift store. It's far less likely to fall into the hands of someone who will be able to use it again if you've already cut out your size. At the fabric and pattern swap I organised recently, we rehomed about 50 uncut sewing patterns to new owners, many of them being vintage ones or ones that are no longer being produced. Yes, tracing pattern pieces takes an extra bit of time plus some additional paper. That is true. But if you cut into the original and later find that you need the uncut and unadulterated pattern again, you're going to need to buy the whole damn thing again, pattern, instructions and packaging, which would mean double the environmental impact of the original pattern. And if you do cut into the original, you'll be rendering it pretty much useless once you're done with it. Therefore, if garment sewing is a passion for you and something you can see yourself doing for a number of years, I'd recommend investing in a large roll of recycled paper suitable for pattern cutting and tracing. I bought a large roll of paper when I was in university and it lasted me over 15 years. But if you don't fancy investing in a roll of paper specific for the purpose, rolls of large format printer paper, wallpaper and wrapping paper can also do the job. Right, PDF patterns. If you've bought a sewing pattern as a PDF, how can you use that more sustainably? Well, as for my previous point about why I feel PDFs are more sustainable than paper versions, the best thing that we can do is only print out a pattern when we are actually going to use it. Printing out a pattern as soon as you buy it, even if you're not planning on making it for a while, might seem like a great and efficient plan, but plans change. You might end up not wanting to make the view you printed out, or you might not end up making it at all even. And that would have been a big old waste of energy, paper and ink. Plus, when you do print out your PDF pattern, there is no need to print out the instructions. Instead, view the instructions directly on your laptop, tablet or phone. For me, saving the instructions on my smartphone has been a real game changer. I find it far more convenient than trying to keep paper pattern instructions on the right page or setting up my laptop on my cramped sewing table. Plus, it means that I can look at the instructions when I'm elsewhere. So when I do sit down to do some sewing, I'm not wasting time getting back up to speed because I know exactly what the next process is. Most PDF sewing patterns now include an A4 and or letter-sized version to print at home, as well as an A0 copy shop file that you can get printed on a large format printer. Honestly, I'm not sure which printing option is the best in terms of sustainability, so go with whichever is the most convenient and makes the most sense for you. If you're printing out A4 or letter-sized pages on a home or office printer, there are definitely things you can do to make this less impactful. Firstly, before you hit the print button, check which pages you actually need. If the pattern offers multiple views, i.e. there are different style variations within the pattern, take some time to work out which pages you need to print out for the one that you want to make. If there's a couple of sleeve options, for example, or if you plan to make the top length rather than the dress length perhaps, it's very likely that not all pages will need to be printed out, which might save you paper and ink. Some pattern companies will detail which pages you need to print out, depending on the sizes or styles you require in the instructions. I've found that pattern company Waves and World do that, for example. But for others, you might need to figure it out for yourself. Secondly, check if the PDF file includes the layers function. This is a biggie for saving you precious printing ink. Increasingly, pattern companies are including the layers function, so if it's there, use it. So basically, when you open up the PDF document, usually in a program like Acrobat, check if there's the logo on the left-hand side that looks like a stack of squares. If it doesn't show up as you open the file, you can find it by selecting View in the toolbar at the top, then Show Hide, then Navigation Panes, then Layers. If your pattern has that function, you can deselect the layers that you don't need by clicking on the tiny eye icons, and all the lines of the sizes you don't need will disappear from view. Make sure you don't deselect the pattern information layer though, because that will contain all the writing and any markings that are common to all the sizes. So by printing out the pattern with only the size or sizes that you actually need, you'll be saving on loads of printer ink, which is basically more expensive per gram than some precious metals. Or at least I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Sometimes it'll also save you paper as well if the unnecessary sizes span additional pages. Thirdly, what paper are you using? I'd urge you to buy recycled printer paper. For that matter, please make sure you buy recycled toilet paper and recycled paper towels as well. It's only worth it for recycling services to collect and recycle paper to make new products, as opposed to sending it to landfill, if there's a demand for products that are made from recycled paper. We need to be keeping as much stuff out of landfill as possible. So while we can't pretend that recycling is the perfect solution, because it is still an energy-hungry endeavour, it is definitely worthwhile for a number of reasons, so we should buy recycled paper products when given the option. Also related to paper, if you work in an office or other workplace that regularly prints stuff out onto A4 or letter-sized paper, is there a source of waste paper you could tap into? Similarly, if you live with kids or work with kids or have a friend or family member with kids, their stream of artwork might also provide plenty of pages that you can print your patterns out on the back of. Personally, I buy my kids recycled paper to use for their art projects. Then, when I can no longer see their bedroom floor for pages of art, I collect up the drawings, select the special ones that I want to keep, and put aside all the sheets that are still flat enough to use again, and then print out my patterns on the back. Sometimes I get busted by my daughter for doing this. She clearly thinks that every single squiggle that she's ever drawn should be kept, even though it would mean we were basically drowning in paper. So once you've printed out the sheets, what are you going to do now? I'd recommend sticking them together with glue rather than sticky tape. I use a thin layer of my kids' PVA craft glue. It holds the pages together perfectly well, although I would advise that you let your pattern dry before cutting out the pieces. And it means that the patterns can then be recycled when I'm eventually done with them. Sticky tape is obviously plastic, which deems every page it touches unrecyclable. Even if you can be bothered to sit down and remove all the tape from your old unwanted patterns before you recycle them, the used sticky tape is still going to be more plastic that ends up in the bin. And yes, PVA craft glue comes in plastic. However, I get the larger volume bottles, which I'm hoping can be recycled once they're empty, and I decant it into little jam jars with screw-top lids, and then they can use it for their craft projects and I can use it for my patterns. Now let's talk about printing out your patterns on A0 format. Happily for us sewers, there are heaps of large format A0 and copy shop printing services popping up all over the place and giving us many more options to get our patterns printed locally or printed then posted to us. The benefit of these services is that you do not then need to stick together all those pages, saving time, effort and glue. From a sustainability standpoint though, there is often more space wasted on an A0 printout than with an A4 or letter size. If you think about it, an A4 pattern can be super exact with the number of pages you need, whereas an A0 is a set size, so the only option for the designers is the number of A0 sheets. So anyway, some of the same tips apply for this format of printing also. Once again, only get your pattern printed out when you are ready to actually use it, in case you change your mind and your sewing plans to avoid wasted resources. Also, check which pages you actually need. If there are different views included in the same pattern or different elements, hopefully they'll be grouped together as such so that you can avoid printing entire pages if necessary. Some pattern companies, like Jennifer Lauren Handmade for example, often include different cup sizes in many of their styles, so you won't need to get all the pages printed because some of the pieces won't be relevant to you. And if the pattern has the layers function, as I mentioned before, an A0 printing service can also deselect the unnecessary lines, which will save on ink. I also think it makes cutting out your pattern a lot easier if you've not got so many lines to confuse you. So check in advance if your pattern has the layers function, and if so, check which size or sizes you require, and ask them when you're placing your order to print out the necessary sizes only. I'm sure they'd be happy to accommodate you. I did this recently when getting a children's pinafore pattern printed in A0. The pattern included sizes from newborn up until age 12, but my daughter is already a size 9, so I asked them to only print out the sizes from 9 up. I then traced off the pattern pieces for the size 9 so I can use the bigger sizes in the future without having to get the whole thing printed out and posted to me again on A0 format. And reflecting the same point with the paper patterns, if you're getting your files printed by an A0 printing service, try to use a local service, or if there isn't one within your local area, at least in the same country. I know that printing services often get orders from people to print out their PDF patterns that then need to get shipped halfway around the globe, literally, even when there's no other physical product within the order. If you're also getting another physical product sent to you at the same time and the price of printing is reasonable, of course I understand that you might want to order them from the same place though. One more idea about A0 printing services. This one might mean that you have to be slightly flexible on my earlier point about only getting a pattern printed when you're about to sew it. If you're using a postal printing service, batch your order so you're getting a few patterns printed at the same time to save on packaging and postage. Personally, the way that I work is that I have a list of potential and future project ideas. And when a few of those ideas and plans have bubbled up as the ones that I definitely want to make, and I have the fabric ready to go for those, I place an order to get the patterns printed for the next 3 projects that I want to make. I have to be fully committed to the plan though and have to have the fabric ready to go. And I have to have used the last 3 patterns before I'm allowed any more A0 prints. But that's just the stupid upholder way that I approach these things. Okay, last point about using PDF pattern printouts, whether you're using an A0 printout or A4 letter pages that have been stuck together. You can also choose to trace out the size you need and retain the original printouts. This will save you the time and hassle of reprinting and sticking together pages if you wish to make alterations to the pattern and may need to refer to the original, or if you want to save the rest of the sizes for the future. When I'm printing out patterns to make stuff for my kids, whether I choose to go with an A0 printing service or print it out at home on my A4 printer, I usually do a combo of these tips. If the pattern looks like it's a useful one that I'll probably want to use multiple times, I'll use the layers function to switch off any sizes that are smaller than my child's current size. Then I'll print out the rest. And then I'll trace off the size I need onto thinner pattern paper and retain all the sizes for future versions. I've done this with patterns for basic pyjamas, sweatshirts, leggings and t-shirts, all items that form the backbone of a wardrobe that I'm likely to make multiple times. So there we go. Those are my hot takes on how to use sewing patterns more sustainably. I have no doubt that there are many other tips, ideas and approaches that I've missed, or great points that may contradict some of the points I've already made. Please let me know your thoughts and ideas or send any feedback so we can have an update on this in the future. You can email me at zoe@checkyourthread.com and you can message me on Instagram at checkyourthread. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram at checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!